and welcome to the Kate Turkington Show. Lots to talk about. If you're at all interested in crime fiction, and I must tell you, I think you know from previous podcasts, I'm a crime fiction junkie. And not so long ago, I'm going to talk very shortly to one of our most famous South African crime novelists, Mike Nicol. But I must tell you, I interviewed a little while ago John, big Irish author, big fan of yours, John Connolly, whom Mike, totally randomly, I introduced to his wife at 7:02 when dinosaurs ruled the earth. Anyway, our guest today is Mike Connolly. He's an investigative journalist. He's a creative writing teacher. He's been writing novels for a very long time, and I'm sure lots of you have read, particularly if you live in the Cape, even if you don't live in South Africa. I'm sure lots of you have read his previous novels, which usually have centered on private investigators or private security. His new one, I'm going to show you that. His new one, he's focusing his attention on something totally relevant to all of us. It's called Falls the Shadow. And what is it about? It's about corruption in the South African police. And you might think if you don't live in South Africa, it's not relevant. When you think of the US, when you think of the UK, almost when you think anywhere, what's happened to our police forces? I don't know. Maybe I'm too cynical. Anyway, welcome, Mike. Now, this is a major new departure for you because, as I say, previously it's been private security, it's been PIs, private investigators. Now you've turned your attention to the police, the South African police. Why?
The crime novel in this country has been mostly police procedurals, and I've stayed away from the cops, I suppose largely because of my age and because of when I grew up. The end of apartheid, I came of age during the 70s and so on, and the cops to me were an invading army. They did things that were just unspeakable. So to me, to have a protagonist who was a police officer kind of went against the grain. And I resisted until I came across that wonderful phrase about who cops the cops, who watches the watchers. And I then decided, okay, enough is enough. I've done 9 books or something. It's time that I actually faced the police. But how does one do that? And I thought, okay, there is a unit in the police that looks after how the police behave. That is the way in for me. So she is there, the protagonist that I came up with, she's there to monitor what the police are doing. And I felt that was a way to handle the politics in the country, the history of the country, and produce a police novel.
And that department she works for, it's totally fictional.
It is, and ICU is the is the acronym for it, because it was to me like an ICU unit in a hospital, there for the patient.
It's internal crimes unit of the police. Yes. Now tell us a bit about your heroine, Zara Dewane. I had to ask you how to pronounce it because I'm not quite sure. Well, you tell us about her.
Okay, she has a bit of a history which I had forgotten about, actually. In the last book, the previous one to this book, Hammerman, she has a small role as the police commander of the police station at Saldanha Bay. And I'd spelt her name differently. It was Dewan. But for some reason, she must have struck a chord, and years later, because it was at least 2 years after Hammerman before I got down to this book, she suddenly manifested herself. Now, part of her background, there are 2 strands to the background. The Zara part, yes, I can thank the clothing brand for that. It's just a wonderful name. I think it's a very strong name, and
Yeah.
I just loved it. So it's there for that reason. The Annie Dewane story in Cape Town, where was this beautiful woman came here on honeymoon with her husband Srian Dewane, and she was shot in a car hijacking. I was asked to write a non-fiction book about it, which I did, called in the end called Monkey Business. And her name was attractive, so I have corrupted it somewhat, and used it for my character Zara Dewane. So that is the history behind the name and the character.
And that, just going back, plugging into my flickering synapses here, the husband of Annie Dewane, got off, didn't he?
He did. The police thought they had a strong case against him, but he was able to leave the country before they could do anything about it. He went back to the UK, from which they'd come in the first place, and they had to then extradite him, which eventually did happen, and he was brought back and he stood trial, and much to everybody's surprise, he was let off at the end, and that was the end of that. Everybody thought that he'd done it, and I don't think anybody's changed their mind.
And I mean, that's almost allegedly, for me, it's almost a link into police corruption, just alleging this. Now, you say the rock band, there's a rock band called Four Non-Blondes, and they are four non-blondes, four women, none of whom are blondes. But you say their music gave a soundtrack to Zara's personality. Just explain that.
It's one of the mysteries of my life. I don't know how I came across this rock band. They lived between 1989 and 1993, I think, as a band, and then they disbanded. But I must have picked them up somehow. I have really, really no idea how. I do sometimes go tracking through YouTube looking for music, and maybe came across them, and that was how it was. And they seemed so out there. They seemed completely aggressive and wonderfully female, and I was just attracted to their attitude, particularly the attitude of Linda Perry, who is the main singer. Interestingly, she went on to have a solo career. And when you see her today, that impish person who's in the early 1990 version of What's Up, she looks as if she's been through life. But
Probably has.
She has, I'm sure. Anyway, she went on to become the soundtrack to the next novel. So I had two goes out of four non-blondes.
And out of interest, the band is called Four Non-Blondes because of Mike and because of Zara Dewane. In the book, I found them on YouTube and listened to them. Not bad rock, as Mike said, it's all about attitude. It's very much attitude, but you should have a look. Read the book first, then have a look or listen to the Non-Blonde. Now, I'm not giving anything away in the book. It's always so difficult when interviewing crime authors because you don't give anything away. But hopefully there are going to be more books with Zara.
Number 2 is written and is due for February next year. What I did, which was unusual for me, but I don't know. Anyway, we do strange things in life. After I'd written Falls the Shadow, before redrafting it, before any of that, I went straight into number 2, which is called Firing Line. And at the end of number 2, I suddenly thought, oh, what? You've done 3 or 4 years. You've got nobody to publish these books, and you're sitting with 2 manuscripts. So I went out to find one of those dreadful things. My agent in the UK had retired, so I was without an agent. But fortunately, there was a woman called Aoife Lennon Ritchie, and she came to my aid and said she would take the books and do what she could to sell them, which she did very, very quickly. So I then had publishers lined up and had to get round to the second task, which is going over the manuscripts and making sure that they looked a lot better than they did the first time round. So that's how the two came to be sold as one, effectively. But I have finished number 3.
Oh, my word, that's prolific stuff. When do you write, Mike? Do you write in the morning, in the evening, or any time?
No. It's morning for me. And it used to be from 6 o'clock onwards, but I've got a bit later these days. Yeah.
I was going to say, I mean, a central character in your books, in many of your books, is actually Cape Town, the town of Cape Town. Why have you set this particular police corruption story in Cape Town?
Well, all the other books have been Cape Town as well.
Yes.
Obviously, because I live here. I mean, that's the first thing. Also, because it just seems to me to be the absolutely ideal crime city. It has this spectacular beauty of the mountain right down the middle, this really attractive town, which is now whatever it is, 3 centuries old or whatever it. And then there's the other side. There's the history, the forced removals out of the town and dumping people on the Cape Flats. And there's the current Khayelitsha that is formed and so on. So it's a very, very diverse city. And I just thought it was a microcosm of the country, really. There's gang violence out on the Cape Flats and so on, because of all the forced removals out of apartheid and all the rest of it. So it just became the quintessential crime city for me. And I mean, interestingly enough, most crime fiction in this country is set in Cape Town. And it's got, it's got beaches, it's got the mountain, it's got everything. And nowadays
it's got crime. It's got a corrupt police force. Do you know, I just love that description of yours, because I haven't heard it before, how Cape Town is actually a microcosm of South Africa, because you've got the bubbles, you've got the wealth, you've got the glamour, you've got the beauty, then you've got the very dark side of crime and corruption and gangsterism or whatever. So that's when you're a writer, you should come up with a perfect microcosm. And while we're talking about Cape Town, your heroine, anti-heroine, your in-your-face police. She's a Captain Zara.
Yes.
Totally in your face with attitude. You can actually see her. She spends her off time sort of coming down from the highs and coming up from the lows of fighting police corruption by kayaking. Why kayaking?
The interesting thing for me, well, because of the sea and because it's been a great part of my life, with the first series, the Mace Bishop series, he's a wild water swimmer, I think they call it these days. He likes swimming in the ocean and so on. With the next lot, Fish and Vicky, Fish was a surfer and he lives in Muizenberg and surfs on. So I had to look for another kind of water vehicle. And the kayak seemed to me to be one that was, suitable for Zara, because you can get quite far in a kayak. You can get quite deep into the ocean in a kayak. And I just thought this would be ideal for her. It could tie in. She's going to launch off of Bantry Bay. Right ahead of her is Robben Island. We've got all the history of Robben Island sitting out there. And she can then paddle down this extraordinarily rich coastline of Cape Town, the Atlantic's from Sea Point down to Camps Bay and then to Llandudno. And one gets that microcosm of Cape Town from the sea. And I thought, okay, this is absolutely perfect for her. I will get her to do this.
Are you a kayaker?
The trouble is a misspent youth, too much time in the sun, not enough sunscreen, and I've got to keep out of the sun these days.
Okay. Okay, sounds familiar. Now, somebody I absolutely love, and of course I shouldn't, because he's the arch villain of the novel. And when I first met him, and as I got to know him as the book progressed, I thought, my word, this is an absolutely perfect James Bond villain. You tell us about him, Mike. He's your villain.
This is Kaiser Wüller.
Yes, General Kaiser Wüller.
Yeah, he first came about in a novel called Agents of the State. And in that novel, he is one of the security detail guarding the president. And there's an assassination attempt on the president, and Kaiser Wüller saves the day, but he's shot in the back, and that confines him to a wheelchair. So I thought, okay, I'm going to bring this guy back, because having a main character in a wheelchair seemed to me to be quite challenging, not only for him, for me too.
Yeah.
Moving him around becomes an issue.
And he has gained his fame and status, although he is now paralyzed, by saving the then president's life, by throwing himself in front of the assassin's bullet, as it were. And now he's a wonderful villain. It's almost like a Shapiro coming.
Well, he isn't. I mean, because of his position, he's got his fingers in a whole lot of pies, and those are the ones that involve selling guns. He doesn't want to trade in diamonds, but one of his sidekicks does, and so he gets drawn into the whole trade in the diamond business. And he was just right there in the middle of things for me. I couldn't have wanted a better character with all the connections he had to fill out that part of the story. So he was just wonderful to write. Now, the interesting thing about him, too, is that when I came to putting him into this book, I have a fascination, thanks to you actually, for the Elizabethans and the Jacobians.
God, you've got a good memory.
And I was reading Macbeth again, and I thought, wow, here is an occasion where I can use the relationship between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth and fashion Kaiser Wüller and his wife on the two of them. So I borrowed Shakespeare's story. Well, he borrowed stories from everyone, so I felt I was quite entitled to do that.
Yeah.
And use him. And I used him and her in the way that Macbeth...
And you've even got a witch, although she's actually a white witch.
Indeed.
Tell us about her.
My granddaughter had come up with this wonderful name of Luna Maplewood, and I just thought it was too good a name to lose. So I swiped it from her. She's very upset about that, but doesn't matter. I'm older. And then I thought, okay, I can't have three witches, but I will have one. And I thought if I make her white, that'll be even better. She can be a white Sangoma, live in the suburb of Cape Town, Rondebosch, and dish out the mootie to Kaiser Wüller.
And what's so interesting about her, and I'm sure this was deliberate on your part, one doesn't quite know as a reader whether she's genuine or not. Did you? I'm sure you intended that.
Yes, I wanted some ambivalence with her, because is she on the straight? Is she just having, is it sarcasm, satire? What is it? It's all of that, really.
Now, okay, so Macbeth, because Lady Wüller, we don't want to give the plot away, but there's a Macbethian kind of figure. There's a very, very ambitious wife, a la Lady Macbeth. You've got a white witch, Sangoma. Mike, I know you're an investigative journalist. How did you do all your research on this police corruption? Were you a mole?
I wish I could say yes. You know, these days, you just, the police dish it up for you. You don't really have to do a hell of a lot of digging. If you read the Daily Maverick, you've got
It is
plots coming
will.
out of your ears. You just don't, there's more than you can deal with. And in fact, I'm afraid South Africa outwits one all the time these days. There's just stuff that happens which you couldn't have dreamt up in a million years.
No,
So it's just one doesn't have to, as long as you're paying attention to what's going on. The stories are all out there. All you need to do is refashion them.
it's almost like, well, again, when I was reading your book, it's almost like Keystone Cops meets the KGB. There's this mix, like all good satire. There's this mix of things that you laugh at, and then it hits you like a sucker punch in the middle when you realise actually this is the truth and that this is what's going on in many, many places in South Africa.
Indeed, but I
Yeah,
mean, one has to. I've always felt that one needs to keep a lighter side to this thing as well,
yeah,
so that there is humor. There's got to be humor. Some of it has to actually be funny. The dialogue has to be as close to the way people behave as possible, and just to give a lighter side through what they say to one another. Because I reckon that in crime novels, the characters talk to one another more than they do in any other kind of novel.
that's true.
And they're very funny when they talk to one another. So to me, it's just the ideal genre for this kind of behavior.
And this is something you're so good at. And again, I was reminded, because I said to you earlier, I'm a crime fiction junkie. I've just read Jonathan Kellerman's latest one. You've got to admire him. He pushes out a novel every year. It's always readable. And it's his dialogue. It's like you. It's the dialogue that keeps the whole thing going and that keeps you going. Okay, it's the plot as well, but basically it's the dialogue. And of course, you use quite a lot of particularly Cape Town slang, but that has never put off international readers. Or
Well,
has it?
the international one has a glossary. I didn't
Yes.
want a glossary in the South African one
No.
because we all know these words.
Yeah.
Um, there's an interesting device that I'm going to use for number 4, which is which I've started on.
I like your style. Yeah.
Because I thought that the language is an integral part of the whole thing, and characterization comes through the language, and one just needs
Yes.
to do that. I mean, there was a quote in the early days when I started writing crime fiction from Elmore Leonard. He says, "Everybody will read the dialogue. They may skip
Skip.
the description, but they're never going to miss the dialogue."
And of course, he was the absolute master.
He
And,
was.
and that is so, so true. Because very often, if you're reading, not top crime stuff, you read the dialogue and you skip over the sort of
Yeah.
padding that comes around it. Now, you're on record as saying, so I went to your website, love your blogs, read all your blogs. You're on record as saying, and I quote, "My interest is in recording history, and that Falls the Shadow is part of your project to write a fictional history of the years since democracy in 1994. Wow, that's quite a lot to take in, a fictional history of the years since 1994. Where does this novel fit into that pattern of history?
Literally, I think around about the time it was written. It was written straight after COVID, so in 2020, and this particular series is set.
Yeah,
I'm more or less writing it against real time.
yeah,
The others had all been filling in because by the time I got to the first lot, it was already 2009, I think, when I started the crime series. Some years ago, I came across some James Elroy, another one of my favorite crime writers, who had said that crime writing was about writing history. And it was the first time I'd ever really thought about that. And I thought, okay, you've nailed it down here. And that's what he's been doing. He, of course, sets his novels way back. They're all set in the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s. And I didn't want to write that kind of novel. I didn't want to go back into those years.
No.
I wanted to write the history as I see it right now. Because history isn't what happened before, it's also what happens right now. So that's why I changed it a bit.
Yeah. Who was it who said, I was just thinking as you're saying that, history is not made by the people who do it, it's made by the people who write it. Somebody,
Yes.
probably Cicero. Cicero said most things. So you want to be relevant and you want to be timeless all the time. So without giving too much away, where will the next one go? Is it still going to be police corruption?
Yes, it's still Zara, and this time, though, there's a Russian connection. The
Of
next
course.
one. But this was before Putin had actually gone into Ukraine. But there were some stories that I came across, and I thought, okay, here's an ideal time to use the Russian connection. So that's what's happened in Firing Line. I'm not going to tell you any more about that, I'm afraid.
And when you're so involved, and even though you do put a very good, fun twist on it sometimes, don't you get a bit despondent by delving into this morass of corruption?
Kate, you know that writing is a strange thing, I think. I think it takes you, strangely enough, it takes you away from it. You're not actually sinking into it, you're going away from it. And that's because you're creating a story with characters that are completely fictitious. One's making them all up as one goes along. And I think that process of creating the story and the characters actually takes you out of the morass, even if that's what the subject matter is. One's focus is on creating a narrative and then bringing these characters to life.
It's almost objectifying, or being able to stand back or to live it through the eyes of your characters. Now,
Yes,
I would be doing the book a disfavour, and it's probably totally unwoke, if we didn't use the favourite phrase of Zara, Dewane, and we all remember, because we all saw it, of the girl riding a bicycle into the rugby goalpost and the mother saying, "Eloise, my fuck."
No, it was,
And you use that as I'm saying it now. I can picture that so brilliant. If you've never watched that, just go on to YouTube and type in Eloise. Why did you make that Zara's kind of mantra? Not mantra, but
as you've said, it caught us all. We all thought it was incredibly funny, and I just thought, character needs a saying. They need something in order to typify them. And to me, that just did it. I thought, okay, I'm going with this. I'm going to change it a little bit. And
Yes.
the Afrikaans is a bit different to the way it should actually be. And that came about because I was eavesdropping on two people in front of me as we walked down the street in Cork Bay. And the one guy said to the other, "My life, man, fuck." And, excuse me, I didn't say that. And I thought, okay, I'm going to change that into Afrikaans and use the Maralies expression, and then I will give Zara the second name of Eloise after the song. So that's how all that came together.
And just finally, Mike, you've almost told us some of them. Who are your favourite crime writers? You've mentioned James Elmore Leonard. We mentioned John Connolly.
Yes.
Was it James Lee Burke? James
Yes,
Lee Burke.
he was also very instrumental. I mean, all these people helped me enormously to be able to write crime fiction. There's a guy called George V. Higgins. He writes sentences which are completely different to mine, and he structures his books completely.
Yeah.
He is just wonderful. and Richard Stark, Robert Parker. These are just Megan Abbott. I think and then there's a female, Vicky Hendricks. She's down in Florida somewhere. Not written many
I
books.
don't know her. Don't know
But
her at all.
completely outrageous crime novels, but absolutely wonderful.
Vicky Hendricks.
Yes.
Okay, and then finally, because we don't always get time, but do you have a favourite travel destination? Just changing the subject.
Wow. Now that's whoa. There are a couple actually. Probably one of them is Berlin. I was lucky enough to spend a year there, thanks to a residency, and it was glorious. The other, completely different, is the Kruger National Park. I just really love time in the park. So those are two, completely other ends of the world.
Well, in between writing and let me show you the book again, Falls the Shadow. By the way, it's published by Pam Macmillan. In between writing all these novels, try and get to Berlin again, and also, of course, you'll get to Kruger National Park. And everybody else, please travel safely, look after yourselves, and look after others too.